generic therapies, and our presentation is entitled Easiest 1, 2, 3, CGT, FDA, and Industry. Our learning objectives for today: first, describe the process for submitting a request for competitive generic therapy, CGT designation, outlining the criteria for designating a drug as a CGT, providing information on the considerations for expedited development and review of CGTs by FDA, and procedural questions regarding CGT exclusivity determinations. Where did CGT originate? The FDA Reauthorization Act of 2017, FDARA, was the reauthorization of the Generic Drug User Fee Amendments GDUFA to support timely access to high-quality, affordable generic medicines. Section 803 of FDARA amended the FD&C Act to add Section 506H, and this section created a new pathway by which FDA may, at the request of an applicant, designate a drug with inadequate generic competition as a CGT. And of course, we'll get into inadequate generic competition and its definition later in the presentation. At the request of the applicant, FDA may also expedite the development and review of an ANDA for a drug designated as a CGT. Also, as part of FDARA, FDA was required to issue guidance on CGT. The first guidance, the draft guidance, was published February 19, 2019. FDA was required to publish that draft guidance within 18 months of FDARA passing. And then the final guidance was recently published on March 16, 2020. FDA was required by FDARA to publish that 1 year after the docket closed on the draft guidance. So we were able to publish that a little bit early. The statutory deadline was April 21st, 2020. So if you're considering development of a CGT drug product, various factors may influence your decision to develop or not develop a particular generic medicine. Obviously, some drugs may not attract much interest because there's a potentially limited market for those products. And naturally, some products are also more difficult to develop. But these drugs can play an important role in diagnosing, treating, and preventing various types of diseases or conditions. And FDARA granted CGT authority to incentivize generic competition for these products, which can help ensure patients have access to the medicines that they need. FDA's goals for CGTs: to facilitate this increased competition, FDA may take certain actions to expedite the development and to expedite the review of an ANDA for a drug designated as a CGT. Hopefully we can help to clarify the regulatory expectations for a particular drug and assist applicants in developing a more complete submission. To promote a more efficient and effective ANDA review process in order to help reduce the number of review cycles necessary to obtain ANDA approval. Requesting CGT designation. A request is submitted by an ANDA applicant, and the designation is application specific. Each applicant should submit a request to FDA for designation. This is one of the things we sought to clarify in the final guidance. We received some comments on this related to the language around drug products and applicants. So we wanted to clarify that each applicant should submit their request if they want CGT designation. And once FDA designates a drug product in the applicant's ANDA as a CGT, that application will remain designated as a CGT. The CGT request also has to be made concurrent with or any time prior to the submission of an original ANDA. Prior to the application, it can be submitted as a standalone request or as an accompaniment to the pre-submission facility correspondence, PFC, for an ANDA. If you're requesting a pre-ANDA meeting, we recommend submitting before the meeting request. Also, when you're submitting with your application, there were a number of questions and comments received on the draft guidance around this. So we sought to clarify that it's you shouldn't be submitting your request along with any amendments to your application. It has to be with the original application. You can't file any amendments during the filing review or those types of things unless it meets the exception and FDA refuses to receive the application. The request for CGT designation also must be made for a drug for which there's inadequate generic competition. The FDA will determine whether a CGT designation request satisfies the criteria within 60 days of the request. A letter will be issued to an applicant either granting or denying CGT designation. Inadequate generic competition for a drug means at the time of the designation, there's not more than one approved version of that drug in the active section of the Orange Book. It can also mean no drugs are listed in the active section. As we clarified in the final guidance, each strength of a drug is a distinct drug product. So you could potentially have CGT designation for one particular strength of a drug. Inadequate generic competition may also mean either the RLD or drug approved in an ANDA referencing the same RLD as a drug for which designation as a CGT is sought. So what should you put in your CGT designation request? Pre-assigned ANDA number, statement supporting your CGT designation request, identification of the drug product, the application number, proprietary name, and the strength, and information supporting inadequate generic competition. And it should be submitted in ECTD format through the ESG, and you should include an FDA Form 356H. What are the benefits of CGT designation? It allows FDA to potentially expedite the review and the development of an application, and most applicants are concerned with eligibility for the CGT 180-day exclusivity. We wanted to point out some numbers. As of March 2020, there's been more than 350 requests for CGT designation. Around 80% have been granted, and they span 540 drug products which have received the designation. And FDA has granted 23 CGT 180-day exclusivity periods. So additional benefits of CGT designation: actions FDA may take to expedite development of the drug product. Product development meetings and pre-submission meetings. And we wanted to point out here that the product development meeting and pre-submission meetings themselves don't take place on an expedited timeline, but rather those are intended to help expedite the overall development of the drug product. Actions FDA can take to expedite review: mid-cycle review meetings, coordinated review of CGTs within OGD and CDER. And FDA will strive to act on the ANDA as soon as possible, including prior to the GDUFA goal date. But again, CGT designation does not guarantee or infer an earlier GDUFA goal date. FDA will just use the development and review actions, hopefully to expedite the ANDA, and we would take action prior to the GDUFA goal date if at all possible. So we wanted to list the factors that FDA considers when we're looking at taking expedited action. One is the complexity of developing the ANDA for that specific drug, the potential public health impact of the drug product, including the severity of the disease that's being treated, size of impacted patient population, and availability of other therapeutic alternatives. And of course, the impact on FDA resources and existing workload commitments, and whether there are any unexpired patents or exclusivities for the reference listed drug. I also wanted to point out here that there's a CGT webpage listing all approved ANDAs for products that have received a CGT designation. It's updated on a bi-weekly basis. It includes information about approved applications, what drug products, and potential CGT exclusivity. This is a snapshot of what the CGT approvals webpage looks like. You'll see the RLD name and NDA number, the ANDA number and the ANDA applicant, active ingredient, dosage form strength, date of approval, and whether or not it was eligible for CGT exclusivity. And you'll see either yes or no there. And CGT exclusivity forfeiture. If there's a no there, that means that eligibility was not forfeited. If it's blank, that determination has not yet been made. And if there's an NA, it means it was not eligible for CGT exclusivity. You'll see that for line number 30. It was not eligible for CGT exclusivity, so it has an NA for forfeiture and date of first commercial marketing. And obviously we'll discuss further later on the commercial marketing triggers CGT exclusivity, so you'll see the date of first commercial marketing listed there. Moving on to CGT exclusivity, we wanted to take a moment here and point out how this CGT exclusivity is different from 180-day patent challenge exclusivity. So the exclusivity itself is newly created under FDARA along with the CGT designation itself. CGT exclusivity is provided to the first approved applicant of a drug with a CGT designation for which there's no unexpired patents or exclusivities listed in the Orange Book at the time of original submission of the ANDA. It's intended to incentivize competition for drugs not protected by patent or exclusivity and for which there's inadequate generic competition. It's not available to an applicant who's eligible for 180-day patent challenge exclusivity for the same drug that's been designated as a CGT. So looking at our chart, we can see that eligibility for Hatch-Waxman 180-day exclusivity is based on the applicant qualifying as a first applicant. And under CGT exclusivity, it's the first approved applicant. And then for Hatch-Waxman 180-day exclusivity, eligibility is possible after your original submission. CGT, we mentioned earlier, it's not possible to be eligible for the exclusivity after your original submission. We mentioned the refuse to receive exception. And Hatch-Waxman 180-day exclusivity blocks subsequent applicants prior to the grant of exclusivity and after the exclusivity grant. And CGT blocks other applicants after the exclusivity grant and the commencement of commercial marketing. Hatch-Waxman exclusivity is subject to multiple complex forfeiture provisions, and CGT is subject to a single simple forfeiture provision. So there are also some similarities between the two. Both can be relinquished or selectively waived. Both are triggered by first commercial marketing. Both can be shared, although that's uncommon for CGT exclusivity if you had multiple first approved applicants. And the exclusivity period runs continuously once triggered. We've mentioned first approved applicants a couple of times, so we wanted to define that. This means an ANDA applicant is first approved applicant for a CGT approved on the first day on which any ANDA for such designated CGT is approved, not eligible for 180-day patent challenge exclusivity for the drug that's subject of the ANDA for the CGT, and it's not a drug for which all versions have forfeited eligibility for 180-day patent challenge exclusivity. When we're talking about the exclusivity criteria, a competitive generic therapy is defined as a drug designated as a CGT, which we mentioned in the first half of the presentation, how to receive CGT designation for your application. It's a drug for which there's no unexpired patents or exclusivities in the Orange Book at the time of submission of your application. And this is different than how CGT is defined for purposes of the designation provisions, which we covered earlier. The drug may be designated as a CGT, but then later ineligible for CGT exclusivity if there are unexpired patents or exclusivities in the Orange Book at the time the original ANDA is submitted. How can an applicant trigger their CGT exclusivity? First approved applicant should commence commercial marketing within the 75-day period beginning on the calendar day after approval in order to trigger exclusivity. FDA is not generally aware of when an applicant commences commercial marketing, so applicants should inform FDA once marketing has commenced so that subsequent approvals can be halted by their exclusivity. OGD will continue to approve other ANDAs for the drug product if we've not received notice of commercial marketing commencing. The special forfeiture rules for CGT, exclusivity is forfeited by a first approved applicant if they fail to commence commercial marketing within 75 days. It's the simple forfeiture rule that we mentioned earlier, and it's as simple as you're not commencing your commercial marketing within 75 days of approval. Our first challenge question: all of the following are reasons a CGT designated ANDA would not qualify for CGT 180-day exclusivity except A, was not the first approved CGT designated ANDA, B, there were unexpired patents for the RLD at the time the ANDA was submitted, C, on the date the ANDA was approved, there was now adequate generic competition, D, the CGT designated drug product had been previously subject to forfeiture of patent challenge 180-day exclusivity. And the answer is C, on the date the ANDA was approved, there was now adequate generic competition. So we talked about earlier inadequate generic competition, and that relates to CGT designation, not to CGT exclusivity. Challenge question number 2, when may I request CGT designation? A, with a prior approval supplement, B, prior to submission of an original ANDA, C, prior to approval of an original ANDA, D, with an amendment of an ANDA. And the answer is B, prior to submission of an original ANDA. We noted earlier in our presentation that the request for CGT designation should be submitted along with or prior to submission of your original ANDA. I also wanted to point out the following CGT resources. The first link is to the FDA website containing the final guidance. The second website is the public docket where the draft and final guidances were published and where the comments were received on the draft and final guidances. Then the third link is to the CGT approvals page. We showed the snapshot of that earlier, showing products where that had approved ANDAs and the information relating to exclusivity, commercial marketing, forfeiture, and those sorts of things. In summary, we wanted to reiterate three things. CGT designation is intended and should be requested for drugs with inadequate generic competition. And you should make your request before or at the time of submitting an original ANDA. And to trigger CGT exclusivity and halt other approvals, you should inform FDA as soon as you've commenced commercial marketing. We appreciate your attention during this virtual presentation, and hopefully our information concerning CGT designation and exclusivity will be helpful, and we'd be happy to take your questions during the panel discussion.
Hello, this is Andrew Coogan from FDA's Office of Generic Drug Policy, and today I will be presenting on post-approval notice requirements. So to start, I have the agenda for today's presentation. I will be reviewing Section 506I of FDA's Reauthorization Act of 2017, also known as FDARA. I will discuss reporting requirements for applicants. I will provide a summary of 506IB compliance. And last, I will identify ways for applicants to provide more useful information to FDA in 506IB submissions. So just a quick overview of FDARA. FDARA was signed into law on August 18th, 2017. And some of the things it did for generic drug industry was that it allowed for continuation of generic drug user fees for another 5 years. It amended laws for improved generic drug access, and it made changes to reporting requirements. Specifically, it created Section 506I. So Section 506I, prompt reports of marketing status. 506I has 3 parts. A, notification of withdrawal from sale. B, notification of drug not available for sale. And C, one-time marketing status reports. All 3 parts of Section 506I apply to NDA holders and ANDA holders. However, for today's presentation, I'll be focusing primarily on ANDA holders. I'll touch briefly on Section 506I near the end of the presentation, but today's presentation will mostly focus on 506IB, notification of drug not available for sale. 506IC was a one-time reporting requirement that required applicants to submit notification by February 14, 2018, so that's not as applicable as A and B are, since it's been over 2 years since those notices were due. So today's presentation will focus mostly on B, and I'll also touch base quickly near the end of the presentation on 506IA. So notification of drug not available for sale. If an ANDA is not available for sale within 180 days of approval, an applicant must submit a notification that the drug is not available for sale. The notification must include the established name of the drug, the proprietary name of the drug, if applicable, the NDA or ANDA number, the strength of the drug, the date on which the drug will be available for sale, if known, and the reason the drug is not marketing after approval. These are all listed in the section 506I, and in the bottom of this slide there's a link to the guidance for industry, which also covers what the notification must include. In addition to the guidance document, FDA has included this information in approval letters. So under the section reporting requirements, FDA has in all approval letters the post-marketing reporting requirements under section 506IB. Notification of drug not available for sale. So in addition to the contents of the notice must also be submitted within 180 days of approval. The notice should be submitted in a letter to the applicable ANDA file through the electronic gateway, and the notice should prominently identify the submission as administrative change not available for sale. So now that I've covered the requirements of 506IB and what to submit, I have two examples to better understand when a notification is required. So for example 1, we have an ANDA 444-444, and let's say it's approved on March 1st, 2020. However, due to a settlement agreement, the ANDA applicant cannot launch its product until July 1st, 2020. So for this example, since the ANDA applicant plans to launch its product within 180 days of approval, they would not be required to submit notification under 506IB. That being said, if the ANDA applicant in this example was a first filer, they would be required to submit notification within 30 days of marketing. And this is due to first filer status, and there's a reference to the CFR that covers this topic. For the second example, ANDA 555-555, let's say this ANDA is approved on the same date, March 1st, 2020, but due to a delay in delivery of the active pharmaceutical ingredient, commercial batches won't be completed until September 2020. 180 days from approval would be in late August, so the ANDA applicant would not be able to launch its product within 180 days of approval for this example. Because of this, the ANDA applicant will be required to submit notice under 506IB with the reason that the product will not be available for sale within 180 days of approval and the date it will become available for sale if that date is known. So the next few slides are just going to be a summary of 506IB compliance. So FDA reviewed ANDAs approved over a 17-month period from October 1, 2017 to February 28, 2019. And we reviewed these to assess 506IB compliance. FDA reviewed ANDAs approved in this time frame to see if applicants were complying with the new reporting requirements, as well as to see what reasons applicants were providing for not marketing their product within 180 days of approval. The graph on this slide shows overall 506IB compliance. To obtain this information, FDA reviewed amendments submitted related to marketing status and annual reports. FDA grouped ANDAs into 1 of 5 categories based on marketing amendments provided as well as distribution data provided in annual reports. If an ANDA applicant submitted a notice or a notification of commercial marketing within 180 days of approval, they fell into the compliant category. If they submitted either 506IB notice or notification of commercial marketing outside the 180 days, they were a late submission. Possibly compliant is ANDAs that did not submit any notice under 506IB, but their annual report showed that their product was distributed during the first year of approval. Undetermined, since a lot of these ANDAs that we reviewed, there have not been a year since they've been approved to when we did the analysis. A lot of them had not had the chance to submit an annual report yet. So if they had not yet submitted an annual report and they did not submit a notice under 506IB, they were put into the undetermined category. And if the ANDA applicant did not submit any notice under 506IB and the annual report shows the product was not distributed in the first year of approval, they were deemed not compliant. So summary of this slide is that of the ANDAs we looked at, a little less than 10% of ANDAs approved in our time frame were not compliant with 506IB reporting requirements. FDA also used the distribution data to look at what percentage of applicants market their product within 1 year of approval. So based on the distribution data and the annual reports, we looked at applicants that marketed their product and did not market their product. Unfortunately, in the analysis of ANDAs approved from October 1, 2017 to February 28, 2019, like I said in the last slide, a lot of them had not yet submitted an annual report. So on the bottom half of this slide, you can see we did a subset analysis looking at just fiscal year 2018 to see what percentage of applicants market their product within 1 year of approval. So in 2018, fiscal year 2018, we had 796 approvals, 82 of those were first generics. And when we did the analysis, 90% of applicants had had a chance to submit an annual report for us to review. And we found that 65% of all ANDAs approved in that time frame had distributed their product within the first year of approval. And it was similar, about 64% of first generics reported they distributed their product in the first year of approval. So overall, we found that about a little under 2/3 of ANDAs approved in fiscal year 2018 distributed their product within 1 year of approval. On this last slide of graphs, it shows the reasons for not marketing that applicants have provided to us. So the graph on the left shows the overall numbers of ANDAs that provided a notification under 506I, and the graph on the right shows the reason for not marketing grouped into different categories. FDA reviewed all the reasons for not marketing with 180 days of approval and came up with the categories of business, manufacturing constraint, patent, miscellaneous, and then if no reason was provided, it was put into the no reason provided category. FDA came up with these categories just as a way to better visualize the data. When an ANDA applicant submits their information, they don't have to use any reference to these categories. They don't have to use any of the reasons that we provided at the bottom here. These are just examples that we provided to let you better understand how we came up with these categories and how we were able to clump it into these different groups to make it easier to kind of see what types of reasons applicants were not marketing their product within 180 days of approval. This next slide, you can see that we took a closer look to find commonalities of ANDAs that submitted notification that fell into either the business category, the manufacturing restraints category, or the patent category. And so 70% of ANDAs that provide a reason that we deem to be under the business group, 70% of those ANDAs had no patents listed for the RLD at the time of approval. For applicants that had a reason related to manufacturing, 27% of those related to API. These are things that the API was in shortage, that the API manufacturer was undergoing manufacturing changes that prevented them to be able to provide the API to the ANDA applicant. And the last category of patents, about 55% of first filers provided a reason of not marketing related to patents, about 55% of first filers. So what can applicants do to provide more useful information to FDA? So the first thing they can do is submit the information in a standardized, consistent format. Providing the information in tables that's consistent across all of their ANDA products is helpful for FDA to better review this information and makes it easier for us to look at multiple submissions. Providing more specific dates is helpful. So instead of calendar year 2020, an applicant could say February 2020 or first quarter calendar year 2020. And lastly, expanding on the reason that the product will not be available for sale. So instead of just saying business reason, which is sort of a huge bucket of possibilities, an applicant could say something like business reason based on competitive marketplace with X number other applicant holders currently marketing, that the ANDA applicant has another approved ANDA for the same substance, or they're identifying a marketing partner. And again, these are just examples. You can give whatever reason you want, but these are just things that would make it more useful information for the agency when we review these submissions. As I said before, I just want to touch quick base on 506IA, which is the other relevant reporting requirement for ANDAs under 506I submission requirements. So applicant holders are required to submit reports under 506IA, notification of withdrawal from sale, 180 days prior to withdrawing an approved drug from sale. Note that a drug is considered withdrawn from sale when the applicant holder ceases its own distribution, even if the applicant holder plans to eventually return to the market, so long as the applicant holder has not ceased distribution due to a routine, temporary interruption in supply. Further information on 506IA reporting requirements is available in our guidance. So this last slide here, I just want to provide some key takeaways from today's presentation. The first is if your product will not be available for sale within 180 days of approval, submit notice under 506IB. Providing more information allows FDA to better understand barriers to generic drug entry to the marketplace after approval. The more information you provide, the better we can create policies that make it easier for you to go from approval to marketing. And so the more information you give us, the better we can serve the overall mission of generic drugs. And the last takeaway is to remember to also report withdrawals from sale under 506IA. This slide is a link to the guidance document, and if you have any questions after this presentation, there's the patent exclusivity team email address as well as the Orange Book email address. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan and Andrew. We are reconnecting our audio bridge so that our presenters will be able to answer the questions. Again, I think we've had plenty of questions come in so far. If you do have questions, feel free to type them in to the Q&A pod there in the lower right-hand corner. But with that, I am going to turn it over to Lisa to see if there are some questions ready.
Thank you, Jeff. This question is for Jonathan. So how many is the maximum CGT, how many are the maximum number of CGT approvals if they are approved on the same day? For example, will all CGT designated ANDA holders be approved as a first approved applicant?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the criteria is first approved applicant. So you want to be the first approved applicant for purposes of the CGT exclusivity. So we tried to lay out some examples in the guidance, but there can be multiple first approved applicants. And those, again, are all the applicants approved on the first day for that product, but there can be multiple first approved applicants.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, do non-complex drug products designated as a CGT qualify for a pre-ANDA meeting?
Thank you. Yes. This is one of the things that we tried to clarify in the final guidance. Non-complex products may qualify for a pre-ANDA meeting, so we tried to lay out the considerations that FDA would consider there. And, you know, the first bullet point there is whether or not the product's complex or not. So if it's not a non-complex product, other factors may weigh into granting a pre-ANDA meeting. You can look at things like whether there's a PSG or not, what's the public health impact, so what's the severity and size of the population that the treatment is intended for, and what's the impact on FDA. So yes, we will consider those things, and we may grant pre-ANDA meetings for non-complex products.
Okay. This question is about slide 8. As a standalone request before an ANDA submission, is there a specific time period before the ANDA submission that the standalone CGT request can be submitted? Meaning, can they submit the standalone request before 3 months or 5 months of an ANDA submission?
Good question. So there is no restriction on the time that you can submit it before you file your ANDA. So obviously FDA would like you to file that as soon as possible, and I'm sure you'd like to know if you're going to receive that designation as soon as possible. So yes, we encourage you to file that as soon as possible, even before you file your ANDA. There may be situations where you file it along with the ANDA, but like our challenge question said, it needs to be filed along with the original ANDA or prior to, but there is no time limit on the prior to, so you can file that as early as you would like.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Our next question is going to be for Andrew. So the question states, if the 180-day notification letter was submitted to FDA stating that the approved drug product would not be approved within the 180 days without a marketing date, should the sponsor advise FDA when the marketing date is established when known?
Yeah, so that is something that would not be required, but again, that's something that would be helpful for the agency to know. So if you do become aware of the date after notifying the agency that the product will not be available for sale, you can submit another amendment to notify us of the date. But again, that is not required, but it is something that would be helpful for us.
Okay. Our next question is, what is the mechanism for reporting reduced anticipated production volumes rather than discontinuation?
So for this, I think that, I don't have a specific answer, but there is a guidance document related to Section 506C, notifying FDA of permanent discontinuation or interruption of manufacturing. That might be a more appropriate guidance to review, and that might provide answers about when you have reduction in anticipation, or sorry, reporting reduced anticipated production volumes rather than discontinuation.
Okay. So our next question is, if the first applicant got approval and commences commercialization on the 70th day from the date of approval, does this mean that any other ANDA applicant for a drug that is the same as a CGT can get approval anytime between final approval and commercial commencement of the first applicant's ANDA?
Excellent question. So this is why we stressed notification of first commercial marketing in the final guidance. So first commercial marketing is the trigger to block subsequent applications from being approved. So FDA has stressed in the guidance that once you commence commercial marketing within the time period, beginning on the first calendar day after your approval, you should commence that and notify FDA, and then that will serve to block subsequent approvals of applications.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is for Andrew. If the ANDA is approved in May 2019, whereas due to the settlement, the launch will be in October 2020, which is beyond the 180 days, so it's under 506I, how should one notify FDA of such a case? In such a case, the approved ANDA appears as discontinued at drugs at FDA.
Yeah, so that's a good question. If, let's say, an applicant knows their launch date and it's going to be outside of 180 days, they would be required to submit notification that their product will not be available for sale within 180 days. And if they provide us with the date that they anticipate launching, then the agency can take discretion about whether or not any other action needed. So in that situation, they would be required to submit notification, and if you provide the date that it's going to be soon after the 180 days, then we would be able to take appropriate action, or that information is relevant to us to not have to move a product to the discontinued section.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Our next question is about CGT ANDAs. So What is the review time for a CGT ANDA? Is this something that is expedited?
Right. So whether it results in a shorter review time or is it expedited? So CGT does not give a shorter GDUFA goal date. So it's a CGT designated product has a standard GDUFA goal date unless it meets another prioritization factor. So we've referenced the other prioritization guidances. If it met CGT and something else under those prioritization guidances, it could get a shorter GDUFA date. But CGT designation itself does not result in a shorter GDUFA date. So we've tried to stress in this, we use all the mechanisms that we've described, the pre-ANDA meeting process, and the utilization of mid-cycle review meetings and the cross-platform teams to review the applications. So we want to use the processes that are described in that guidance to reduce any potential resubmissions and make sure we're getting good submissions and trying to approve the ANDA on the first cycle when it's submitted. So we tried to move the application along in that way and expedite it. If we're able to act on it earlier, we would strive to do so as a CGT, but it's not a shorter GDUFA goal date.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. This is Jeff Kelly. And once again, I am being the time ogre. We were moving into our lunch break. We extended there a little bit, but we will get started again at 12:30. I'm going to go ahead and move us into the break layout so that you will be able to chat between yourselves in the chat pod there that's on the left side of the screen. Over on the right side of the screen where it says we are on a break, there is an extra button there that says visit the CDER SBIA website. I encourage you all to take a look at that. Lots of great resources there that SBIA has made available to support you. And other than that, we will see you back here at 12:30 Eastern.